The void of space had always felt endless, but to Captain Lyra Kale, it now felt confining. Her ship, the Ardent Horizon, drifted through the starless black of the Terran cluster, the quiet hum of its engines barely audible. For days, they had been in the same place, the same coordinates, waiting for something that was supposed to come but never did. On the bridge, the soft glow of holographic data streams flickered in the dim light. Lyra stood at the helm, staring at the seemingly empty void. The coordinates they'd been given, the ones that promised answers to the greatest mystery of humanity's existence, were proving false. For the past 3 weeks, the Ardent Horizon had followed the trail to Elysium 7, a planet that had been wiped from every star chart, its very existence erased from the annals of human history. And yet, somehow, they had found it, or thought they had. Behind her, Dr. Elias Court paced nervously, his sharp eyes darting from one terminal to the next. His tall frame seemed to stretch in the cramped space of the bridge, his every movement betraying his inner turmoil. He was a man of science, of logic, a man who thrived on understanding the unknown. But this was something that defied all reason. "Captain," Elias said, his voice laced with frustration, "we've been here too long. If there's no sign of the civilization we're looking for, then we need to move. This whole place could be a trap." Lyra turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I don't believe in traps, Elias. At least not like you do. This is something different. I can feel it. Something's out there. Something waiting for us to find it." "You sound like one of those ancient explorers," Elias muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Chasing myths, hoping for miracles." "I'm not chasing anything. I'm following the trail left by them," Lyra replied, her voice calm but determined. "The Elysium Project. They were supposed to be the pinnacle of human achievement. They vanished off the map over a century ago, but their technology, their research, was never found. Until now." Elias let out a frustrated sigh. "And you think this Elysium 7 is their home? Their sanctuary?" Lyra didn't answer right away. She didn't know. But something about the planet, something about the strange energy patterns they detected around the atmosphere, told her it was no coincidence. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, urging her to push forward. Before she could respond, a series of rapid beeps from the communications console interrupted her thoughts. Lyra's eyes flicked to the screen, where a faint signal began to blink, erratic but unmistakably coming from the surface of Elysium 7. "We're not alone," she muttered under her breath. "Elias, get to the shuttle bay. We've got a signal." Lyra and Elias descended toward the surface of Elysium 7 in a sleek shuttle. The planet below them was a beautiful anomaly, lush green forests, towering mountains, and sprawling oceans. The kinds of things that should have been impossible on a planet that had supposedly been dead for over a century. They landed on the edge of a sprawling, overgrown city, an alien civilization's abandoned home. The architecture was unlike anything they had seen before, geometric, sprawling, with structures that twisted upwards like vines climbing toward the sky. The air was dense and humid, a heavy fog blanketing the ruins. It was eerily silent, except for the distant hum of the shuttle's engines as it powered down. Lyra stepped out first, her boots crunching the earth beneath her feet. The signal had originated from the heart of the city, its source unknown, its purpose unclear. Elias was close behind, a portable scanner in his hand as he carefully analyzed the surrounding area. "What the hell is this place?" Elias muttered, his eyes scanning the towering structures. "This doesn't look like any human architecture I've ever seen." "It's not," Lyra said, her voice low, almost reverential. "It's Elysium. They were the ones who built this." Elias shot her a confused look. "You're saying the Elysium Project did all this? But why? What is this place?" Lyra couldn't answer. She didn't know. But the signal pulsed again, stronger now, and she felt an overwhelming pull to follow it. She motioned for Elias to stay close. They navigated through the ruined streets, the city stretching out before them, like the ruins of a forgotten empire. The eerie silence was deafening, and Lyra's heart began to race. They were close. She could feel it. As they approached the center of the city, the air grew thicker, and the temperature dropped. The signal was now unmistakable, emanating from a large structure in the middle of the city, a temple-like building, half crushed by debris, but still standing tall. Inside, the walls were covered in intricate markings, symbols that resembled a form of writing, but far more complex than any known language. Elias began scanning the walls, his eyes scanning the data as it streamed across his wrist console. "It's all in a pattern," he muttered. "This could be some kind of neural language. I've never seen anything like it." Lyra stepped closer to the central chamber, where a glowing object pulsed in the middle of the room, an orb, a sphere of light, floating in mid-air. It was the source of the signal. "Is that it?" Elias asked, his voice filled with awe and trepidation. Lyra nodded, her eyes fixed on the orb. "That's it. That's what they left behind." Suddenly, the orb flickered, and the air around them hummed. The ground shook as if a force was trying to tear the very fabric of space itself. Elias stepped back, his eyes wide with fear. "What the hell is happening?" he shouted. Before Lyra could answer, the orb flared brightly, and a voice, low and resonant, echoed through the chamber. It wasn't a language they recognized, but somehow they understood. The voice felt ancient, terrifyingly ancient. "You have found us. You have awakened what was never meant to be disturbed." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a message for her. This wasn't a greeting, it was a warning. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. "Who are you?" The orb flickered again, and the voice returned, this time with more force, more clarity. "We are the Elysium. We are the architects of your species, and we have watched you." Elias took a cautious step back. "What are you talking about? You created humanity?" The voice didn't answer right away, but the pulse of the orb grew stronger. And then, slowly, images began to flicker in the air, visions of ancient cities, advanced technology, and strange alien beings. And then there was something darker, something that sent a cold shiver down Lyra's spine. A vision of a galaxy in flames. "We were the ones who shaped you," the voice continued. "We gave you the gift of life, but it was not your time. You were never meant to reach the stars. You were meant to remain contained." Lyra's stomach twisted. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "You are the product of an experiment," the voice intoned. "A failed one. You were meant to stay hidden, to never evolve beyond what we allowed. You were an oversight." The ground trembled violently now, the orb spinning faster, glowing brighter. The air felt charged, oppressive, as if something was waking up. Elias looked at Lyra, panic evident in his eyes. "This was a trap," he breathed. "You weren't supposed to find this." Before Lyra could respond, the orb erupted in a blinding light, sending them both crashing to the ground. The walls of the chamber cracked, and debris fell around them. For a moment, everything went black. Lyra awoke to a harsh light, the hum of machinery surrounding her. Her head throbbed, but she managed to sit up, her eyes quickly adjusting. She was no longer in the temple. She was in a sterile, cold room, some kind of facility. Elias was beside her, slowly coming to as well. As he stirred, Lyra realized the true depth of the situation. The Elysium had awakened something inside her, something more than just a warning. They had unlocked something they weren't meant to. And now, it was clear, humanity's true purpose was something far darker than she had ever imagined. They were no longer just explorers. They were prisoners in an experiment that had been centuries in the making. Lyra had always believed that the unknown was her domain. As a captain in the Galactic Exploration Corps, she had faced countless dangers, charted uncharted territories, and encountered beings beyond human comprehension. Yet, nothing had prepared her for what they had uncovered on Elysium 7. What was supposed to be a routine mission had become a journey into humanity's darkest origins. When the orb the Echo had shown its true power, Lyra and Elias were left with nothing but questions, and a planet that no longer felt like a place of discovery. Elysium 7 had become their prison. The air around them hummed with an unnatural energy, and the eerie silence that followed the orb's awakening gnawed at their minds. They had come to this place searching for answers, but they hadn't anticipated the cost of those answers. For Elias, the cost was personal. His once unshakable belief in the importance of logic and evidence had been shattered. The Elysium Project, once thought to be an ambitious venture in human evolution, was now a terrifying reminder of humanity's fragile place in the universe. The message from the orb had made it clear: humans had been part of an experiment, one that had gone awry. The gods who had created them had watched their growth, only to decide that they were a failure, a dangerous one. And Lyra, she felt different, too. A part of her had changed in that moment. The orb's message, its call, had stirred something deep inside her. A part of her wondered if it was too late to turn back. But there was no turning back now. Lyra stood on the observation deck of their temporary base, a facility that had once been Elysium's central hub. The massive windows showed nothing but an endless horizon of alien terrain. The Terran cluster was a void of stars, and yet, beneath it all, Lyra knew that something was watching, waiting. Behind her, Elias entered, his presence like a shadow in the sterile white room. He was still adjusting to the changes, the strange dreams, the haunting visions that had plagued him ever since the encounter with the orb. He hadn't told Lyra everything, she knew that. But his sleepless nights, his distant gaze, told her more than words ever could. "You're up again," Elias said, his voice weary but concerned. "You need rest." "I'm fine," Lyra replied, though her words lacked conviction. "I can't sleep. Not with all of this hanging over us." Elias stepped forward, his dark eyes scanning the city outside. The once thriving metropolis was now just a hollow shell of its former self, its structures darkened with age, consumed by the creeping vines of an unknown plant species. Elysium 7, like everything else they had encountered, felt caught between two worlds, the past and the unknown. "We're not the first to try and understand what happened here," Elias said quietly, taking a deep breath. "But every effort before us has failed. The truth isn't something we can just unlock." Lyra didn't turn to face him, but she could hear the underlying frustration in his voice. He wanted to believe in logic. He wanted to believe that they could find a simple explanation, a map, a guide to get them out of this mess. But the truth was far more complex and dangerous. "I know," she replied, her tone distant. "But we don't have a choice, Elias. The Elysium Project, it's not just a warning. It's a promise, a test, and we're part of it now. I can't just walk away." "I'm not asking you to walk away," Elias said, his voice softening. He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on her. "But I'm worried about you. I've seen what this place does to people. It's like it changes you. You're not the same person you were before, and neither am I." Lyra met his gaze, her breath catching in her chest. She had known for a while that their relationship, whatever it was evolving. The pressure of their mission, the weight of the discovery they had made, had drawn them closer, but it had also forced them into an uncomfortable dance of dependency. They both knew it. The uncertainty of the situation had blurred the lines between them. What started as professional respect, a mutual goal, had morphed into something more, something that neither of them knew how to handle. "I don't know what's happening to me, Elias," she whispered, "but I can't stop. I won't stop." Elias looked away, his jaw clenched. "I know," he said. "I see it. It's in your eyes. But Lyra, we can't be controlled by this place, by what it makes us feel. We have to stay grounded. If we let the Elysium Project take over us, we'll become just another part of its experiment." His words stung, but they were true. The atmosphere on Elysium 7 was thick with energy, alive in a way that Lyra couldn't explain, and she wasn't the only one who felt it. Elias had started to experience strange phenomena as well. Waking dreams, flashes of images, visions that seemed to call to him from the ruins. Lyra turned away from the observation window, her mind racing. "I just need more time to figure out what the echo really is. We can't leave yet." Elias stepped forward, a hesitant expression on his face. "Lyra, I know you, but this isn't just about uncovering the truth. You're pushing yourself too hard. You need to rest. Take a step back before. No, Lyra interrupted, her voice sharper than intended. I can't rest. Don't you see? We were meant to find this place. The Echo chose us, Elias. We're not just explorers anymore. We're something more. Elias stood silently for a moment, his eyes searching hers. He could see the change in her, as much as he hated it. This place was doing something to them both. He knew that, and yet, the more he resisted, the more he felt himself drawn to the enigma of Elysium 7. There was a part of him that couldn't look away, that couldn't give up the search for understanding. What if we are the experiment? Elias said quietly, almost to himself. What if we're not the ones who get to make the choice? Lyra stiffened, his words striking a chord deep inside her. She wanted to argue, to dismiss his fears, but the truth was that she didn't have an answer. What had happened to them, the dreams, the visions, was real, and it was changing them both. Days passed in a blur of restless nights and feverish research. The ruins of Elysium 7 had become their laboratory, their prison, and their sanctuary. Lyra continued to study the strange neural patterns embedded in the planet's infrastructure. She felt connected to it, somehow. The more she analyzed, the more she believed that the Echo was a link, a bridge between humanity and something beyond their comprehension. Elias, on the other hand, had grown distant, consumed by his own doubts. He tried to focus on the scientific evidence, but every time he entered the heart of the city, he felt as though someone was watching him. The visions were growing stronger, more vivid. He saw images of the Elysium Project's founders, humans who had once been part of an elite collective, seeking to transcend their own limitations. But their desire for ascension had led them to play God, and in doing so, they had condemned themselves. And now, humanity was the last test. A final experiment that, like all others, had failed. Or was it still ongoing? One night, after a long day of research, Lyra and Elias sat together in their shared quarters. The soft glow of the data terminals lit their tired faces, casting long shadows on the walls. "We can't go back," Lyra said quietly, her voice breaking the silence. Elias looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the Echo has shown us the truth. We can't go back to what we were before. We've been changed." Elias swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Then what are we supposed to do now?" Lyra reached for his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. She had never felt more connected to him than she did in this moment, a moment of shared understanding, of shared transformation. The future was uncertain, but they were in it together now. "We keep going," she said, her voice firm. "We don't have all the answers, but we have each other." Elias looked up at her, the weight of everything they had uncovered pressing down on them both. But in that moment, as their hands met, they knew one thing for certain. No matter what the Elysium Project had planned for them, they would face it together. The days blurred into weeks. Time on Elysium 7 was no longer measured in hours or minutes. It was as though the planet itself had imposed a new sense of time, one where the past, present, and future coiled together in a chaotic dance. Lyra and Elias found themselves trapped in this strange temporal shift, their every waking moment spent deciphering the ruins, battling with the mounting tension between them, and grappling with the realization that they were no longer the same people who had arrived here. Elias had become more withdrawn. He had spent the last few days deep in the central archives of Elysium 7, trying to make sense of the cryptic data patterns they had discovered, the neural architecture embedded in the planet's infrastructure, the strange organic systems, and the unsettling visions they'd experienced. He had come to one stark conclusion. The Echo was not just a beacon, a message, or a tool. It was alive, and it was communicating with them. But how? Lyra, meanwhile, had become fixated on the energy, the pulse of life that seemed to permeate everything. It wasn't just a source of power, it was conscious. Lyra felt a pull every time she stepped into the heart of the ruined city, an overwhelming sense of connection to something that transcended human understanding. She couldn't explain it, but the more she interacted with the structures, the more she could feel the Echo trying to make contact with her. Each night, They would meet in the darkened quarters of their temporary base, exchanging what little information they had uncovered. The bond between them, strained and fraught with tension, had deepened in ways neither of them fully understood. One evening, after another long day of fruitless research, Lyra stood before the largest of the city's remaining spires. The architecture around her seemed to pulse with an almost sentient energy. She was growing restless again. The longer they stayed on the planet, the more she felt like she was losing herself. Every day, the city called to her in new ways. She didn't want to admit it, but she was scared. The line between her mission and her obsession had begun to blur. Elias approached from behind, his footsteps light on the cracked stone. "You've been staring at that building for hours. I don't think you're going to find anything new by just looking at it." Lyra didn't turn to face him. "Maybe it's not about finding something. Maybe it's about feeling something." Elias raised an eyebrow, walking up beside her. "You're not serious, are you?" "I'm deadly serious," she said, her voice soft but determined. "Elias, this place is alive. I feel it in my bones, in my blood. Every time I stand here, I can hear it, the echo calling me. It's as though it's reaching out, trying to connect." Elias looked at her carefully, his skepticism evident. "And you think you're the only one feeling it? I don't want to discount what you're going through, Lyra. I'm not blind. But we've already seen what this place can do. It's not just calling out to you, it's trying to use you." Lyra turned to him then, her eyes narrowing. "It's not trying to use me. It's trying to communicate with me, with us, and I think I'm the only one who has the ability to hear it." Elias swallowed hard, trying to keep the unease out of his voice. "But why you? Why now? We've been here for months. The echo didn't show itself like this to anyone else." "Maybe that's the point," she said, her voice growing more intense. "Maybe it was waiting for the right person. I think the echo has been watching us this whole time, guiding us, making sure we found it. And now it's waiting for me to make the next move." Elias stepped back, shaking his head. "This is dangerous, Lyra. Whatever it is, whatever we are to the echo, it's not just a message. It's an experiment, and you're playing right into it." The tension between them had reached a boiling point. Lyra's face hardened, her earlier resolve slipping into frustration. "You don't understand. I have to understand this. We're so close, Elias. I can feel it. We've been given a chance, a purpose." "A purpose?" Elias scoffed. "A purpose isn't what we're after. What we need is a way out. We need answers. We need to stop whatever this is before it consumes us both." The words stung, but they were true, Lyra knew. The fear in his voice was genuine. Elias was terrified of what they had uncovered. Terrified of the way the echo had already begun to change them. "I know you're scared," she said, her voice softer now. "But so am I. Every day, I'm losing pieces of myself. But I can't walk away from this. I can't just leave, not when I know that this, whatever it is, deserves to be understood." Elias's eyes softened for a brief moment, but the unease was still there, lurking beneath the surface. He stepped closer to her, his voice quieter now. "What if understanding it means losing yourself forever?" Lyra hesitated. The question hung in the air like a weight. What if she was already lost? As the days turned into weeks again, the strain on their relationship became more apparent. They no longer shared the same vision. Lyra was obsessed with unlocking the secrets of Elysium 7, convinced that she could unlock the echo's ultimate purpose, whatever it was. Meanwhile, Elias had become more withdrawn, more frustrated. The dreams he had started having were growing darker, more vivid. He saw images of humans changing into something unrecognizable, their faces warped in agony as the echo twisted their bodies and minds. But despite their growing distance, they both found themselves drawn back to the heart of the city. Together, they entered the largest of the crumbling structures, a towering cathedral-like building that had once been the center of the Elysium Project's operations. The air inside was thick with tension, as if the very walls held memories of those who had lived here long ago. Lyra felt the pull again. It was stronger than ever. "There's something in here," Lyra whispered, her fingers trailing along the walls, feeling the cool, smooth texture of the stone. "Something. Waiting." Elias stood a few steps behind her, still scanning the room with his scanner, but his eyes were fixed on her. "This place is a prison, Lyra. Don't forget that." She didn't reply, but her lips tightened. Elias's skepticism had grown into something darker. He no longer trusted the echo. He no longer trusted Lyra. As they walked deeper into the structure, they came to a massive chamber. Its vaulted ceiling collapsed in several places. In the center of the room stood a massive holographic interface, an ancient console that still pulsed faintly with light. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is what we've been looking for." Elias was silent. He didn't trust the console, but Lyra was already kneeling in front of it, tapping in a series of commands that seemed to make sense in a way she couldn't explain. The screen flared to life, showing a series of images, humans, once brilliant and full of promise, now twisted and distorted beyond recognition. They were the original test subjects, the ones who had been chosen to undergo the same experiments Lyra and Elias were now caught in. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the final image, a symbol that had been present throughout the city, a symbol that now seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. It was the same symbol that had appeared in her dreams, the same symbol she had seen every time the echo reached out to her. "This isn't just a project," Lyra murmured, her eyes wide with realization. "It's a trap, a test, but not just for humanity, it's a test for me." Elias looked at her, his heart sinking. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, the console flickered. The lights dimmed, and in an instant, the room was plunged into darkness. The darkness in the chamber felt suffocating. The faint hum of the ancient console was all that remained, a ghostly echo in the absence of light. Lyra's fingers trembled on the cold, metallic surface as she fought to regain her bearings. The pulse of the echo was stronger now, vibrating in the air, inside her mind, echoing in the depths of her being. The energy was like a living thing, coursing through the ruins of Elysium 7, and she could feel it reaching out to her. But Elias was silent behind her, too quiet, too still. "Lyra," Elias said softly, his voice filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "We need to leave this place. Now." She shook her head, stubbornness rising in her chest. "No, I'm not running from this anymore, Elias. I can feel it, we are the key. It's us they've been waiting for." The darkness seemed to grow thicker as the words left her lips, the air growing colder, more oppressive. Her heart raced in her chest as the implications of what she had just said settled in. "You're not thinking clearly," Elias replied, his voice edged with a growing desperation. "This thing, the echo, it's playing with us. It's toying with our minds. You can't let it control you, Lyra." "I'm not letting it control me," she snapped, her temper flaring. "I'm trying to understand it. Don't you want to know the truth? Don't you want to know why we were brought here? Why we were chosen?" Elias's hands clenched into fists, his body tense. "We weren't chosen. We were used. We've been pawns in a game we don't even understand, and now you want to give in, to let it use you." Lyra turned slowly to face him, her eyes flashing. "If this is an experiment, Elias, I'm done running from it. I want to know everything. I want to know why humanity was banned from evolution. I want to know what the echo is, and why it's been waiting for us. For me." Elias's face twisted with a mix of frustration and fear. "Because it's not just a test. It's a trap, Lyra. It wants to feed on us. It wants to consume us." The words cut deeper than she expected, and for the first time, Lyra hesitated. She had been so driven by her need for answers, so fixated on unlocking the mystery of Elysium 7, that she had stopped considering the consequences. What if Elias was right? What if the echo's intentions weren't benign? She could see the fear in his eyes now, and something inside her softened. She had known him long enough to understand that his cynicism came from a place of deep concern for her, concern that she was losing herself in this place. But the need for answers still burned inside her, sharper than any fear. I can't leave. Not now, Elias. Not when we're this close. Elias stepped closer, his voice low but firm. I'm not asking you to leave. But we have to be smarter than this. We have to take a step back. This place, it's changing us. You are changing. She stepped away from him, her body tense, her mind at war with itself. The connection to the echo was undeniable, and yet Elias's words rang in her ears. Was it possible that the echo had become too powerful, too invasive? Was there a point where the knowledge they sought would no longer be worth the cost? Her resolve wavered, but only for a moment. I'm not afraid of what this place might do to me, she said, her voice firm again, though her heart raced. I'm afraid of what will happen if we don't see this through. If we don't understand why humanity was barred from evolution. What if we're the key to something bigger, something the universe is waiting for? Elias's eyes narrowed as he took a step back, running a hand through his short, dark hair. He was clearly struggling with his own emotions, torn between the woman he had come to care deeply for and the overwhelming dread he felt in the presence of the echo. Lyra, he began quietly, I've never doubted your courage, but I can't do this with you if you're going to lose yourself, if you let the echo win. For a moment, there was silence. The air seemed to still, as though the ruins themselves were holding their breath. Lyra felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over her. She loved him. She trusted him. But she couldn't stop now, not when she was so close. Yet, a part of her, deep down, feared Elias was right. What if the echo wasn't offering enlightenment, but destruction? What if the cost of unlocking the truth was too high? I don't know if I can stop anymore, she whispered, almost to herself. Elias stepped forward, his voice softer now, full of concern. You're still you, Lyra. Don't forget that. No matter how much this place changes you, you have to hold on to who you are. We'll find another way. Together. But there was something in his voice, something that made her realize that his words were no longer a plea to stop. They were a warning. For the next few days, the tension between them grew unbearable. Each day felt like they were walking on a razor's edge, their every conversation laced with unspoken fear. Lyra continued her investigation into the echo, spending more time in the ruins, sometimes for hours, alone. She felt herself drawn deeper into its pulse, like an addict to a drug, each moment spent in its presence feeding her need for understanding. Elias, on the other hand, was becoming increasingly withdrawn, his mind consumed with fear. He could feel the changes in Lyra, could see the way the echo's influence had begun to twist her. It was as if she was slipping away from him, disappearing into the depths of the mystery. The woman he had known, the calm, logical, determined Lyra, was no longer the same. At night, they would retreat to their quarters in silence, and though they still shared the same space, there was a gulf between them, one that seemed impossible to bridge. Elias found it hard to even look at her anymore without feeling the weight of the chasm between them. One evening, after a long day of isolation, Lyra sat before the ancient console again, her fingers dancing over the interface, trying to decipher the next layer of the echo's message. Elias entered, his face grim, his eyes shadowed with the weight of his thoughts. Lyra, he said, his voice hoarse, you need to stop. We're not supposed to understand this. It's not meant for us. I've been trying to find another way out, a way to reverse the damage the echo is doing. But I can't do it alone. You need to trust me. We need to leave, now, while we still have a chance. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the glowing symbols before her. I can't stop now, Elias. Not when I'm this close. I can feel it. We're on the verge of something monumental. We were meant to be here. Elias crossed the room quickly, grabbing her by the shoulders and turning her to face him. His eyes were wide with a mix of fear and desperation. You don't get it, do you? You are changing. You don't recognize it, but I do. You're becoming something else. Something I don't know if I can reach anymore, and if you keep going down this path, there's no coming back. Lyra's breath hitched at the intensity in his voice. She wanted to pull away, to argue, but something inside her held her still. His words were like a mirror, reflecting the fear she had refused to acknowledge. She wasn't the same. The echo had taken something from her, and she didn't know how much more she could give. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what they had uncovered. The truth, the burden it was too much for one person to carry. "Elias," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm scared." He pulled her into his arms without a word, holding her tightly, as though to keep her tethered to reality. "I know you are. But I'm here, Lyra. We'll face it together." For the first time in weeks, the tension between them seemed to ease, if only for a moment. In that moment, Lyra realized something. The echo might have the power to change them, to bend them into something they didn't recognize. But it couldn't break the bond they shared, not unless they let it. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Lyra and Elias had the conversation in the ancient cathedral, the one where they almost lost each other. Since then, they had continued their investigation, but the unease between them had not dissipated. In fact, it was worse now. Every day spent on Elysium 7 seemed to draw them further apart, as if the planet itself was pulling at the fibers of their relationship, testing their trust in each other and in themselves. Lyra had become more obsessed with the echo. She couldn't deny it anymore. Every waking moment she spent in the ruins, feeling the pulse of the planet's energy, was a moment she lost herself a little more. The voice, or the presence, whatever it was louder now. It no longer whispered in her dreams. It spoke to her even when she was awake, its thoughts swirling around hers in a disorienting blur. She knew Elias was watching her. He didn't have to say it, but she could feel it, the growing concern, the almost pained looks he gave her when he thought she wasn't looking. She could see the strain in his eyes when they worked together, when he tried to engage her in conversation, only to be met with a distant stare, a brief answer, or silence. He was losing her. And the fear gnawed at her heart. It wasn't just Elias. Lyra had begun to doubt herself, too. She had always prided herself on her strength, her clarity of purpose. But here, on this planet, all of that seemed to slip away like sand through her fingers. The echo was like a force of nature, wearing her down, reshaping her, bending her will. And yet, it called to her. She couldn't explain why, but she knew she was meant to understand it, whatever it was. Elias had spent the last few days alone, searching for anything that might offer a clue about how to reverse the damage the echo was doing. Every time he turned to Lyra for help, she was deep within the ruins or lost in the glow of the console, her fingers dancing over the interface with an almost feverish intensity. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had fought alongside, was slipping further and further away from him. It was terrifying. It wasn't just fear for her safety, but fear for what she was becoming. He had seen the way she had changed. There was a hollow look in her eyes now, as if a part of her was gone. Every word the echo spoke to her, she absorbed it like a sponge, leaving less and less of the woman he had once known. The dreams continued. Elias didn't want to acknowledge them, but they were growing more vivid. He would wake in the middle of the night, sweating, heart pounding, unable to shake the images of twisted human forms. He had seen faces, human faces, once filled with life, become distorted, stretching into grotesque shapes as the echo consumed them. But what disturbed him most was the feeling of recognition that accompanied these visions, as though those faces, those figures, were somehow familiar to him. And then there was the sensation that he, too, was being watched. The feeling wasn't confined to his dreams. During the day, he would catch glimpses of movement in the shadows of the ruins, a flicker of something or someone just out of the corner of his eye. But whenever he looked directly, there was nothing there. It was as if the planet itself was alive, feeding on his fear, drawing him into its web. Lyra was in the central chamber again, the vast, domed room that she had visited so many times before. The walls were lined with strange symbols, ancient carvings that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the echo's heartbeat. She had uncovered something new in the data, a deeper layer of the pattern. It was almost like a conversation, two-way communication. The echo wasn't just a thing or a force. It was a mind, a sentient entity, waiting for them to unlock the rest of the puzzle. She had been working on the console for hours. Her fingers moved with a practiced precision, inputting commands, reading the cryptic feedback that appeared on the holographic screen. But something was different this time. She could feel it. The echo's presence had intensified. It was no longer just in her mind. It was in the room with her, close, almost tangible. It surrounded her, tugging at her thoughts, urging her to keep going, to unravel the final piece. Then she heard Elias's voice, faint at first, as though it were coming from a great distance. "Lyra." Her breath hitched. The voice was so soft, yet it cut through the haze of the echo's influence. She blinked rapidly, as if waking from a dream. "Lyra." Elias's voice was louder now, more insistent. She turned, startled to see him standing at the threshold of the chamber, his expression strained. His face was pale, his eyes wide with concern, but it was the fear in his eyes that stopped her heart. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice low. Elias stepped closer, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for something. "Lyra, we need to leave. Something's happening. I've been seeing things. I don't know what's real anymore." For a moment, Lyra didn't answer. She could see the trembling in his hands, the way he was looking around, as though expecting something to emerge from the shadows. "What do you mean? What have you seen?" she asked, her voice quieter now, a knot of unease tightening in her chest. "I keep seeing faces. Strange, distorted faces, and I feel like I'm being watched, like the planet is doing something to me." His words came in a rush, panic creeping into his voice. Lyra stood up, her mind racing. "Elias, I've been feeling it too. I think it's the echo. It's trying to communicate with us. It's—" "No." Elias cut her off, stepping forward, his eyes pleading with her. "No, Lyra, you're not hearing me. You don't understand what's happening. This place, this thing isn't here to help us. It's here to use us, to destroy us." Lyra shook her head, taking a step toward him, her voice soft but firm. "It's not what you think. The echo wants us to understand. It wants us to unlock the truth. We're on the verge of discovering something incredible, something bigger than anything humanity has ever known." "You're not listening," Elias said, his voice breaking with frustration. "The truth is, we were never meant to be here. We were never meant to uncover this. The echo is corrupting us, Lyra. It's turning you into something else. And if you don't stop, if you don't listen to me, I can't stop," Lyra shouted, her voice raw with emotion. "I can't go back. Not now. Not after everything we've learned. You don't understand. You think I'm being consumed by this, but I'm not. I'm finally seeing what's really out there." Elias's face twisted with pain. "And what's out there, Lyra? What do you think is waiting for us beyond the echo? More death. More suffering. We've already seen what this place can do to people. We're next." Lyra felt her chest tighten. She could hear the truth in his words. But the pull of the echo was stronger. It had become a part of her. She couldn't let go. Not now. "I'm sorry, Elias," she whispered, her voice breaking as she turned back to the console. "I can't leave. I can't turn back now." For a moment, Elias just stood there, watching her, his face a mask of anguish. But then something shifted in him, something broke. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked out of the chamber, his footsteps heavy on the cracked stone floor. Later that night, Lyra sat alone in the dimly lit chamber, her fingers hovering above the console. The echo's presence was suffocating now, its whispers louder, more urgent. The room seemed to warp around her, the walls shifting like living things. She could feel Elias's absence like a wound. She had pushed him away, choosing the echo over him, choosing the truth she thought it could give her. But now, as the weight of the decision pressed down on her, she realized that in her pursuit of knowledge, she had lost something far more precious. The atmosphere on Elysium 7 had shifted again. What had once been a vast, awe-inspiring place now felt like a living organism breathing, pulsating with a rhythm all its own. Lyra could feel it, like an invisible thread pulling her deeper, guiding her steps through the ancient halls. But as much as she tried to push it away, she couldn't ignore the growing rift between her and Elias. The last few days had been tense. Elias had distanced himself more and more, retreating into the solitude of their quarters, focusing on his research, refusing to engage with her unless absolutely necessary. The anger and frustration in his eyes, when they did speak, were unmistakable. And yet, Lyra had a hard time letting go of the feeling that she was on the edge of something monumental. Lyra was standing before the central console again. The symbols glowed faintly in the low light of the chamber, casting long shadows on the cracked stone walls. She had been here for hours, trying to decipher the final sequence in the echo's pattern. But now, more than ever, it felt like the echo was speaking directly to her, its voice a soft, constant hum beneath her skin. The sensation was unsettling, like a whisper you could almost catch, but never fully understand. The past week had been a blur of fragmented images and cryptic messages, but there was one thing Lyra couldn't shake. The truth she sought, the final revelation, was within reach. She was certain of it. The echo wasn't merely a force of nature, it was a repository of knowledge, a sentient consciousness that existed on the cusp of understanding. She had no doubt that if she could unlock its secrets, humanity would be thrust into a new era. They would have the power to transcend the limitations that had been imposed upon them. But Elias. She glanced over at the other side of the chamber. His desk was a mess of scattered notes, half-completed experiments, and datapads. He was sitting at the far end, his back to her, his face obscured by a tangled mess of exhaustion and anxiety. It hurt to look at him like this, to see him retreat further into himself with each passing day. She knew he was worried about her. She could see it in the way his eyes would flicker with concern whenever she spoke to him. But there was nothing he could say that would change her mind. Not now. She stepped closer to the console, her fingers grazing the glowing interface. The sensation that had been plaguing her for weeks now intensified. The voices of the echo were louder, more distinct. She could almost hear individual words, now fragments of sentences that made no sense on their own, but together held some kind of strange promise. You are the key. We are waiting. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She stood frozen for a long moment, listening. The voice was clearer now, more than just whispers. It was beckoning her, urging her to move forward. This was it. This was the answer she had been searching for. Elias had been watching her from across the room, his heart sinking as he saw the way she seemed to lose herself in the console, in the strange rhythm of the echo. He had tried everything to get through to her, to remind her of the reality they were in, to convince her to leave before it was too late. But every time he opened his mouth, the words fell flat. It was as if she couldn't hear him anymore. He knew that the echo had been changing her. Slowly, insidiously, it was erasing the person she had once been. Lyra had always been strong, determined, but this obsession was something else entirely. He had tried to reach her, to make her see reason, but all he had left was silence. But what troubled him most was the growing sense of dread that had settled in his chest. The vision, strange, fragmented images, had only gotten worse. He could see them now, even when he closed his eyes. They weren't just faces anymore. They were people, human forms, twisted and broken, their eyes filled with fear and longing. And there was something else. A feeling that the echo was watching him, that it had become aware of his presence, and was, in some strange way, responding to him. For days, he had been trying to decipher the patterns in the data they had collected, looking for a way to disrupt the echo's hold on them. But no matter how much he worked, it felt like the walls were closing in. Every solution he tried felt like a dead end. The only thing that seemed to have any effect on the echo was the presence of Lyra. When she was near the console, the messages became clearer, more urgent. And yet, every time he saw her immersed in that energy, he could feel her slipping away from him. The Lyra he knew, the woman who had been his partner and confidant, was fading. She was being consumed by something he couldn't fully understand, something they had unleashed. Lyra. Her name seemed to break through the fog that had surrounded her. She blinked rapidly, as though coming out of a trance, and turned to face him. Elias's eyes were wide with a mix of frustration and fear, but there was something else there too, something that almost looked like sadness. You need to stop, he said, his voice hoarse. Please. I know you can't hear it, but this place, it's breaking us. It's breaking you. For a moment, Lyra stood in silence, her gaze locked on him. She could feel the weight of his words, but they didn't register. Not fully. The echo was still pulsing in her mind, louder now, insistent, calling her to unlock its secrets. "We are waiting." "I can't stop, Elias," she said softly, her voice tinged with the same obsession that had taken hold of her for so long now. "I can feel it. We're so close. The truth, it's right there." "No, it's not." Elias's voice cracked as he took a step closer to her. "Lyra, you're not listening. The truth isn't what you think it is. Whatever this thing is, it's not what you believe it to be. It's manipulating you, using you, and you're too far gone to see it." She felt her pulse quicken at his words, and something deep inside her stirred anger, perhaps, or fear. She had heard these words before, but they had never felt more like a betrayal. The thought that Elias, her closest ally, her partner, could think she was being used. It burned. "I'm not being used," she said through gritted teeth. "I want this. I want to understand. Don't you? Don't you want to know what happened to humanity? Why we were kept from evolving? Why we were cast aside? I need this, Elias. I need to know." Elias was silent for a long moment. His shoulders were slumped, his face pale. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I've lost you, haven't I? The woman I knew, she's gone. The echo has taken her." Lyra flinched at the words, but they didn't pierce her as they should have. She was beyond the point of turning back now, and part of her knew it. She had been swallowed by the very thing she had sought to control. She could feel the weight of it in her chest, a growing pressure, as though the echo was inside her, becoming part of her. "I'm still here," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm still me." Elias shook his head, his face filled with sorrow. "No, Lyra. The echo's taken you. It's taken us both." The words hit her harder than she had expected, and for the first time, she felt a shiver of doubt. Was he right? Had she become something else? Had she really lost herself in this search for answers? She opened her mouth to respond, but the echo's call drowned out her thoughts. It was louder now, urgent, demanding her attention. Before she could say anything more, Elias turned and left, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall. Lyra stood alone in the chamber, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. For the first time, she wondered if she had truly made a mistake. In the days that followed, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling of Elias's absence. It was more than the physical space between them, it was the emotional distance that had grown between them since the moment she had refused to listen to him. She had thought she was doing the right thing, pursuing the truth. But now, the truth seemed hollow. The echo had promised knowledge, but at what cost? Elias was right about one thing. They had both been changed by this place. But where his transformation had been one of fear, hers had been one of obsession. And in the end, neither of them had escaped unscathed. The silence in the ruins was deafening. The once vibrant echoes of distant voices, the hum of activity, the soft thrum of ancient machinery had faded to nothing. Now there was only Lyra, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. The stone walls of the cathedral had become a tomb, echoing with the remnants of a decision she couldn't undo. She sat alone at the console, her fingers tracing the symbols once more, but it was no longer the same. The initial rush of exhilaration, the intoxicating promise of knowledge, had begun to fade, replaced by something darker, more insidious. The whispers were louder now, filling the space around her, pressing in from every direction. The presence of the echo had become palpable, no longer distant or abstract, but intimate, like a shadow that followed her every move. For days, Elias had stayed away. He had withdrawn into the confines of their quarters, spending hours in isolation, buried in his research. Lyra didn't need to be told why. She knew. The tension between them had been growing, a quiet fracture that deepened every time they crossed paths. Elias had tried to save her. He had warned her, tried to reason with her, but she hadn't listened. She couldn't listen, not when the echo's pull was so strong. Lyra's heart ached. The truth she had sought for so long was within reach. She could feel it in her bones. But with every step toward the knowledge she craved, something inside her shifted. The more she understood the echo, the more she realized how much of herself she was losing. Was it worth it? She didn't know anymore. Elias had been pacing for hours in their small, dimly lit quarters. He could barely breathe. He had tried everything to reach Lyra, but every time he spoke to her, every word, every warning seemed to push her further away. It was as though she had become someone else. The Lyra he knew, strong, unwavering, the woman he had fought beside in countless battles, was gone. She had become a ghost, a shadow of the person she had once been, consumed by the echo. He ran his hand through his hair, frustration mounting. How had it come to this? When they had first arrived on Elysium 7, he had been excited, curious, eager to unravel the mysteries of this ancient world. But now, with each passing day, the sense of dread that had settled in his chest only grew. He had seen the changes in Lyra, the obsession, the withdrawal, the isolation, and he knew, deep down, that he was losing her. Elias had seen the faces, those twisted, tortured faces that haunted his dreams. He had tried to dismiss them at first, chalking them up to stress, to fear. But now, there was no denying it. The faces were real. The echo was alive, and it was watching them, watching him. Every waking moment, he felt its presence, like a heavy weight pressing down on his shoulders, suffocating him. But what terrified him most was the thought that it was reaching out to him, drawing him in just as it had with Lyra. He had heard the whispers, too, at first faint, then louder, growing more insistent. "You are the key," they said. "You will understand." What did that even mean? What was the echo trying to tell them? He couldn't do this alone. But the fear was unbearable, the fear that if he stayed, if he allowed himself to be consumed by the same obsession that had taken Lyra, it would be the end of them both. He had already lost her. If he stayed any longer, he feared he might lose himself as well. It was almost midnight when Lyra left the cathedral. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to escape the pull of the echo, if only for a moment. The walls seemed to close in on her with every step she took, the constant thrum of the echo vibrating in her bones. But outside, the cold night air was a relief, even though it did nothing to calm the storm inside her. The stars above Elysium 7 were like diamonds scattered across an endless black canvas. 1,000 worlds, 1,000 mysteries waiting to be uncovered. It felt like an eternity ago when she had stood on this planet's surface, full of hope and curiosity, ready to unlock the secrets of the universe. Now, she wasn't sure if she was looking for answers anymore. She was just looking for peace. She wandered through the empty streets of the ancient city, lost in thought, until she found herself at the edge of the central plaza. There, beneath the towering obelisks that lined the square, stood Elias. He was staring out into the distance, his posture rigid, his face a mask of conflict. The faint light of the twin moons bathed him in an ethereal glow, but there was nothing beautiful about the sight. He looked broken. For the first time, Lyra wondered if he was as lost as she was. "Elias," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. He turned sharply, his eyes wide with surprise. But when he saw her, the tension in his face dissolved into something like exhaustion. He didn't speak for a long moment, as though searching for the right words. "I didn't think you'd come," he said finally, his voice low and rough. Lyra didn't know how to answer that. She wasn't sure why she had come. But the moment she saw him, she realized just how much she had missed him, how much she had pushed him away without meaning to. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. Elias shook his head. "It's not your fault. You've changed, Lyra. But I don't think I can follow you down this path anymore. I've tried to understand. I've tried to help. But I can't. I'm afraid of what this place is doing to us." Lyra's chest tightened at his words. She had known this moment was coming, the moment when he would reach his breaking point. But hearing him say it, seeing the pain in his eyes, was still like a dagger to her heart. She had pushed him away. She had chosen the echo over him. She could feel the weight of that decision crushing her. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Elias's gaze softened, but there was no mistaking the sorrow in his eyes. "I don't want to lose you either, Lyra, but I don't know how to bring you back. I don't know how to save you from this." There was a long pause as the two of them stood there in silence, the distance between them palpable. The echo's whispers grew louder in Lyra's mind, as if it were trying to drown out the moment. She could feel it, like a tightening grip around her chest, urging her to listen, to return to the console, to continue her search. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Lyra didn't want to listen. She didn't want to hear the echo's voice anymore. She didn't want to be consumed by it. She didn't want to lose herself completely. Elias, her voice trembled as she reached out, her hand hovering just inches from his. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know if I'm still me, but I know I need you. I don't want to be alone in this. Please, don't leave me. Elias hesitated, his eyes flickering with indecision. For a moment, Lyra thought he might turn away from her, walk off into the darkness and leave her behind. But then, slowly, he reached out, his hand closing around hers. I'm not leaving you, he said softly. But I can't walk this path with you. Lyra, you have to make a choice. You have to decide if you want to stay with the echo, or if you want to come back to me. The words hung in the air between them like a heavy weight. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she looked into Elias's eyes, seeing the pain, the hope, and the desperation there. He was giving her a choice, a chance to turn away from the echo and return to the person she had been. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. The echo had already claimed so much of her mind, her heart, her soul. Would she be able to walk away? Would she even know how to? The night stretched on, the twin moons above Elysium 7 casting long shadows across the plaza. Lyra stood there, her hand in Elias's, caught between two worlds. And for the first time, she realized that the greatest mystery of all was not the secrets of the echo, but the choice that lay before her. Would she allow the echo to define her? Or would she find a way to redefine herself, to reclaim the life and the love she had almost lost? The cold of the desert night on Elysium 7 clung to Lyra's skin, sharp and unforgiving. She hadn't expected to feel so vulnerable, standing there with Elias, her hand still caught in his, both of them bound by the weight of the decision that loomed ahead. The echo was still there, lurking just beyond the edges of her mind, its whispers softer now, but persistent. You are the key. You will understand. You must continue. But Elias was right. She was losing herself, and the deeper she went into the labyrinth of the echo's influence, the harder it was to see her way out. Her heart ached as she stared up at the twin moons of Elysium 7, their light casting a pale glow over the ruins around them. The city, with its vast columns and intricate carvings, felt alien now. What had once been an awe-inspiring monument to a forgotten civilization had become a prison of knowledge, a place that held the power to either elevate humanity or destroy it. And in the midst of it all stood her and Elias. Two people caught in the crossfire, forced to confront the consequences of their choices. Elias had retreated to his quarters after their conversation in the plaza, his mind a whirlpool of conflicting thoughts. He had seen the signs in Lyra, but he hadn't truly understood the depths of her obsession with the echo until now. She was slipping away. Slowly, imperceptibly, but she was slipping. The person he had once known, his partner, his friend, was becoming a shadow. She was so consumed by the echo's promises of knowledge that she had begun to lose sight of who she had been. The guilt gnawed at him. He had never wanted to be the one who held her back, who kept her from fulfilling her potential. But the echo was a dangerous thing, a force that had already started to warp her mind. And it wasn't just Lyra he feared for. He feared for himself, too. The visions, the whispers, he was starting to hear them too. You are the key. You will understand. You are not alone. He had tried to ignore them at first, tried to convince himself it was just the stress, the isolation. But now, he wasn't so sure. The echo was aware of them. It was aware of him. There was no going back. They were both caught in its grip. But there was still time. That's what Lyra kept telling herself as she stood before the central console the next morning. The urgency of the echo's message had only grown in the past few hours, but now it felt different, less like a command and more like a plea. As though the echo was aware of her hesitation, aware of the growing divide between her and Elias. You are the key. Lyra could feel the weight of those words more than ever. The echo wasn't just speaking to her anymore, it was speaking through her. It had become part of her, she could feel it in her mind, threading its way into her thoughts. She wasn't sure if she was still her anymore, or if she had become something else entirely. Her fingers hovered over the console's interface, the familiar hum of the echo vibrating through her fingertips. She could almost hear Elias's voice in her head, urging her to stop. But his words were faint now, drowned out by the growing chorus of the echo. "Lyra, please." Elias's voice broke through her thoughts. He had entered the chamber without her noticing, and now he stood behind her, his presence a solid weight at her back. "You have to stop. This isn't you anymore." She turned, surprised by his sudden appearance. His face was drawn, pale from lack of sleep, his eyes shadowed with the weight of their shared burden. He was desperate now, more than ever. He could see what she was becoming, and the fear in his eyes was enough to pull her from the brink at least for a moment. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't stop now. I'm so close. Elias, don't you see? This is the truth we've been searching for. The answer to everything." Elias took a step closer, his voice shaking. "The answer to what? What do you think this will solve? The echo, whatever it is, it's using you. Lyra, you're losing yourself in it, and I don't know how much of you is left." Her heart twisted at his words. She knew he was right. She had felt herself slipping, like the woman he had once known was fading, being replaced by something darker, something consumed by the power of the echo. But how could she stop? How could she turn away when she was so close to understanding it all? "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice softer now, more vulnerable. "I don't want to lose the person I fell in love with." Her breath caught in her throat at his words. The person I fell in love with. Was that still who she was? Or was that a ghost now, a distant memory of someone she used to be? "I'm still here," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm still me, Elias. I swear." But as she spoke, something inside her trembled. She wasn't sure anymore. The echo's influence was so strong, so pervasive, that it was hard to tell where she ended and it began. She looked at Elias, his eyes filled with tears that he didn't try to hide. The man who had been her constant companion, her confidant, the one person who had always believed in her. And now, he was begging her to stop. The days that followed were a blur of indecision, tension, and the looming threat of the echo. Lyra tried to focus on the console, on the mysteries that lay before her, but every time she touched it, she felt Elias's presence, like a thread of warmth in the cold, unyielding grip of the echo. She couldn't push him away. She didn't want to. But what was the cost of her choice? Was she willing to sacrifice the only person who still mattered to her for the promise of knowledge, for a truth that might not even exist? Elias, too, had changed. His eyes were darker now, his face etched with the weight of sleepless nights and constant worry. The visions that had tormented him before were becoming harder to ignore. He had started to see things, strange shapes in the corners of his vision, shadows that seemed to move with a will of their own. The voices in his head had grown louder, too. He couldn't escape them anymore. They weren't just speaking to Lyra, they were speaking to him, calling him by name. But there was a part of him that refused to believe it. He couldn't. Not when the person he loved was still here, still reachable. And yet, he couldn't deny that the pull of the echo was growing stronger. Every day it threatened to consume them both, to tear them apart completely. Lyra's thoughts were interrupted when the ground beneath them trembled, a deep, resonant hum that echoed through the chamber. It was a familiar sensation now, one that had been growing stronger over the past few weeks. The echo was reacting to something, responding. But to what? She looked at Elias, who was staring at her, his face drawn with fear. "We're running out of time," he said, his voice shaking. "The echo, it's becoming unstable. We don't know what will happen if we keep going. We don't know if we'll survive this." "I can't just stop, Elias," she said, shaking her head. "I can't turn away from this now. The truth is out there, and I'm the one who has to find it." "Lyra," his voice was almost pleading now, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "I don't want to lose you." She looked at him, and for a moment, everything inside her faltered. The pull of the echo, the thirst for knowledge, had been consuming her. But here, standing in front of her, was the person she loved. The person who had always stood by her side. "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered, her voice breaking. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The echo hummed around them, louder now, as if it were growing impatient with their indecision. They were at a crossroads, each standing on the edge of a precipice, too afraid to jump, but too terrified to turn back. The next few hours passed in a haze of confusion. But one thing was certain: they had reached a breaking point. The echo was no longer something they could control, something they could study. It was a force of nature, something that had begun to push at the boundaries of their understanding. It was threatening to consume them, to erase everything they had worked for.